So this week we're back to giving the shiur. The topic this week is of a more general nature, hopefully of just a general interesting nature, not necessarily something specifically that we're learning. And this shiur was inspired by a story, an anecdote that someone shared a few days ago. A few days ago someone shared that certain chashavei mashpia, I'm not going to drag his name into this, this context, but certain chashavei mashpia in Chabad related the following zikaron, the following memory that he has, that in the early years, he says, the Rebbe used to drop off the mail himself in the mailbox. And once, Rav Aharon Kotler, Rosh Yeshiva of Lakewood, wrote in one of the koftzim, person who shared it originally said Apardis, then he said no, he wasn't sure if it was Apardis or Hamar. We'll see which one in a moment. But one of the koftzim in halacha that were active at the time. So Aharon Kotler said, he wrote that it's usher to send mail Erev Shabbos. So a few weeks later, I guess it's implied that everyone was watching, everyone wanted to see what's the Rebbe going to do, what's the Rebbe's response. A few weeks later they saw that the Rebbe went to the mailbox as usual in Erev Shabbos. That's the story. Okay, so my first instinct, my first reaction when I heard the story is this a serious story, or is this the kind of thing that Bachrim back then convinced themselves, or eingedet or whatever? So the thing that's perhaps easier to check is whether any such thing was published in the koftzim at the time. So as we shall see, in fact, there's quite a lot of material on this subject documenting this parsha back then, and I think it's a fairly interesting parsha to discuss, so that's what we're going to discuss here. So, in fact, I found it not in Apardis, but in Hamar, just as by way of introduction, to introduce you or to refresh your familiarity. Hamar was a kovitz in halacha that was published here in Brooklyn, began in Tafshin Yud, Adar Tafshin Yud, actually, the first kovitz. It has a shtickle about the Frierdiker Rebbe's passing. And it was published for many, many years following. In fact, it's still essentially being published till today. The editor, the Miyasid, was Rav Meir Amsel, who was in charge till his passing in 2007. Rav Meir Amsel was born in Hungary, but he wasn't, I guess you could say, your typical Haredi Hungarian Rav that gravitated towards Hisachtos or towards other groups. He was a Rav in Borough Park. He was his own, as far as I know, he was his own individual, his own personality, and he feared Tish through the kovitz of Hamar. In fact, he had some friction with some of the more right-wing Hungarian communities, etc. He seemed to remain fairly close, affiliated, aligned with Chabad. At some point they started printing the Rebbe's Torah, I think in every kovitz or every few kovitzim. And the last few years of the kovitz, the last few years of his life already, the kovitz fell from its former glory. But it was still published, and it's still being published till today, even after he passed away. In some senses, I would say that it's a bit of a zombie kovitz, and that it's still coming out, and no one's quite sure, what's going on there, why it's being printed. But on the other hand, I have come across that sometimes you have young writers, people that want to write a shtickle on Torah, they're looking for a place to publish it. You will sometimes find interesting quality shtiklach, even in Hamar till today. Pretty sure I quoted something someone wrote in Hamar a few years ago in another shiur. One of the interesting things you could see about Hamar is how at an earlier stage, how much more communication there was between different communities. And as we'll see in this discussion, how Litvische and Hungarian Rabbanim are all participating in a discussion. Doesn't always mean that they understood what the other one was saying. They spoke different languages, even in halacha. But there's still a lot more of an active participation from various corners of the Haredi community, and as we shall see. So in Hamar, issue, which is already a few issues into this discussion. Let's begin from how this discussion began and see what was going on. So in Hamar, issue number 51, which was published the date of Adar Tavshin Tezvav, so 55, the following shtickle appears there by Rav Tuvia Goldstein, Ram Yeshivas Yaakov Yosef, New York. So just to introduce him briefly as well, Tuvia Goldstein happens to be a name that I'm familiar with from growing up. My mother's father, Zain Gesund, who learned in Torah B'das, I've understood that he had a kasher at some point with Rav Tuvia Goldstein. Rav Tuvia Goldstein was born in Poland, but in Poland he ended up going to Navardik and other Litvish yeshivas that between the wars were actually technically in Poland, Baranovich, Kamenetz. So he ended up being essentially Litvish Talmud, came to America after the war, ended up on the Lower East Side, ended up very close to Rav Moshe Feinstein. It's said that Rav Moshe would actually call him and talk to him about shilas that came up. So he's a very chashav Talmud Chacham and a product of Litvish yeshivas. He taught in yeshivas, Yaakov Yosef, his RJJ, for many years, and then he moved to Borough Park where he opened his own yeshiva, and his family continues the yeshivas and whatever, Svarim, Torah that he wrote and composed and is being published. So Rav Tuvia Goldstein is the one who introduces this question. And the question he writes is it mutter to send a letter on Erev Shabbos through the mail where there are Yidden who are employed? Because surely those Yidden will be over on Isser Ksiva Min HaTorah. He also mentions, which ends up being a footnote to the discussion, but he also mentions you can have a similar question when you deposit, you write a check for a bank. The bank might process, happens to be part of the original question. The shaila is this lifnei iver min HaTorah? Is this just misayeh midrabanan? Or is it completely mutter? And of course, he's essentially raising an issue, creating an issue, as some might complain when people do this, but it's a shaila. Is this an issue? As from Yidden who live among many less from Yidden, obviously there's a Shabbos, but still felt trapped by the American employment landscape. Obviously, as the 50s were carrying on, from Jews found more ways to keep Shabbos and to find employment that respected Shabbos. And as might be relevant to this discussion, at a later point in 1964, the Civil Rights Act was passed when the government officially acknowledged that an employer should provide religious accommodation to an employee, as long as it's within reason, whatever the exact legal language is and standard is, and this kind of, some of the more extreme questions of what's considered accommodation still comes up before the court till today. But generally it's taken that keeping Shabbos and letting people off for Shabbos, especially since the 5-day work week has been accepted, is generally considered reasonable accommodation. So that might change this whole discussion anyway. But back then, there are still a lot of Yidden that are working in the post office. It's not clear how many Yidden would still even find themselves with that type of employment today. So you still have a lot of Yidden working in the post office, still working their way up through the ranks in American society. You still have Yidden that might want to keep Shabbos, but feel that they have no choice. They're being kept at work over Saturday. And of course, there are other Yidden who are even further along who might not care. So this is the question he's raising. So he begins by discussing this as a classic Lifnei Iver question. It's l'chayra, today Avra Denara, your piece of mail is in your house, the Yid's never going to get it, you go deposit it in the mailbox, the Yid either picks it up or gets brought to the post office, and then the Yid in the post office processes it. So you have essentially brought this item to this Yid and enabled him to be mechad thereby with this item that you gave him. So is this classic Lifnei Iver Min HaTorah? And he says right away, this is a very difficult tover, kasha ma'oi lizar b'zeh. And this is interesting, he already mentions this is a part of the discussion, that there are many Jewish meistes, many offices that perhaps were sending a lot of fundraising mail, and Friday's the last day in the office from Maisid. So the mail dump of the week would be finished and sent out on Friday. So you take your big pile of mail, you send it to the post office, you put it in the mailbox, and so essentially Firma Yidden themselves are potentially responsible for many thousands of items of mail being processed Friday and Shabbos. And he's speaking from the perspective of, let's try to help them, let's try to defend them, let's stand up for them. It's hard to say that everyone's doing the wrong thing, that everyone's being nichshel. So it's possible that he wasn't literally the first person to think this up. Could be the Yeshiva Shavelt or whatever was already having this discussion about pen. He decided to write about it. Unclear. As we shall see, it became a big discussion certainly afterwards. So it begins by being Magda. You have this mystical Lefnei today Avra Denara. So the way he frames it is, though, what if the Nazir already has wine in his own house, right? The classic case is you're giving the wine to the Nazir. No, what if the Nazir has plenty of wine in his own house, where he comes from? You're not giving him anything that he doesn't already have. You're just giving him more of what he already has. Is that Lefnei Iver, or is it not Lefnei Iver? Obviously, in this case, we're saying the equivalent case would be where the Nazir is for sure going to drink both, meaning there are other cases where you have multiple possibilities for being over Lifnei Iver. The question is, will he use this one? Will he use that one? What if you assume that he's going to just drink everything? He's going to drink what he has at home. He's just going to drink what you give him now. So, will you machshel him, or he's already being nichshel? You were the one that caused him to drink. He wasn't going to drink before. So he says, really, this is a discussion in Rishonim. There are cases with giving animals to a guy where it sounds like even if the guy has the animal, it might still be an issue to give him another animal, whether the guy might be Reveya the animal, or the guy might be Mesaris the animal. Right, so he quotes a Tosfos, the guy was going to be nichshel with every behema that he has. So from these Makairis, it sounds like that every additional opportunity, even when it's involving a guy, is considered Lifnei Iver. So that would be a problem. So even if they're already sitting in the post office and they're being nichshel anyway, but every piece of mail that you add, if they are processing it and it involves ksiva, so you're being machshel them, they're being nichshel. However, there's another mahalach, there's another shita in the Rishonim. It says there's a ritva and a me'iri. What's pshat on the ritva? Then he quotes the me'iri. The me'iri seems to say very clearly, Kol ma shenesar mishum lifnei iver if he was able to, literally, you're the one who made it possible, you're the one who gave it to them, they wouldn't have been able to do it without you. And he says, Kol shekain, if he already has it. You're giving him more, so it's not lifnei iver midiraisa, it takes you down a level, takes you down a notch, it's possibly misayeya, which is an isser d'rabbanan, which can cover certain cases in which Lifnei Iver doesn't apply. You still might be over Misayeya Midirabbanan. He continues discussing a bit the Ritva, Tosfos, this, that. Okay, but let's see Lamer Zagen. We have a Shita Rishonim, Shita Me'iri in the Ritva. So we have a Heter Barim in Atayra that if you send a mail on Erev Shabbos, you're not over in Atayra Lifnei Iver, even though it's Avra Denara, because we know they're being over in Isser Ksiva regardless. So you're just being Marba Be'Isser, and it's not Lifnei Iver in Atayra L'Shita Sam. What about Misayeya Midrabanan? So he says, well, first of all, there's one Heter that's mentioned. There's a Shach. The Shach says that Misayeh doesn't apply to a mummer. You're dealing with a mummer, someone who's already mummer l'kalatayra, mummer to Yanam and Tayra. So mummer l'chal Shabbos is way up there. That's considered a mummer. So if he's already mummer l'chal Shabbos, so you're not. What are you adding? You're not over Misayeh when you're enabling him to be over on more. That heter is not so clear. In the heter butter, different achrein disagree. He says, we have a better heter. This is a ksav sefer that says as machadish that Isser Misayeya might be broader in certain ways, but it's also limited in certain ways. Misayeya is only if it's b'shas ma'isa ha'aveda. If you're there right when the aveda is happening and you make it happen, then it's awesome. But if it's shaloi b'shas ha'aveda, then it's fine. So Bazai, You're not handing the mail to the Yid on Shabbos. You're putting the mail in the box on Erev Shabbos, and then ultimately it ends up, it's not B'shasa Isser B'chlal. And then later, B'shasa Isser, the Yid has it and he does what he does. B'zoi, you're not over Messiah. That was essentially Rav Tuvia Goldstein's binyan of how he presented it, how he was marked the question, and how he solved the problem and said, you know what, it's not such a problem. He says, by the way, this is not the only issue, not the only such issue you might come up with. If you start thinking about it, what about the garbage? You put the garbage out for pickup. Maybe there's some Jews that work in the sanitation department. Maybe not as many as in the post office, but maybe there are some. Etc. But he says, we're going to stick to what we discussed here. He says, Bekitzer, according to Me'ili and the Ritva, it's mutter, and it shouldn't be issue Messiah as well. So he's asking, he's trying to open a conversation. Interestingly, 2 issues later, issue 53 of Amar, he prints 2 letters, not from Rabbanim at all, but from people who are described as posters, heard about Rav Goldstein's article, and they're writing in to Amar with their take, with their feedback. So one is signed by someone whose name appears to be Joe Isaacs. It's written all in Hebrew. I imagine they might have written in other languages and he translated it into Hebrew for Hamar, whatever the case may be. Rabbi Amsel, my rabbi, showed me Rabbi Goldstein's article, and it sounds like there's like a new campaign to get people to stop sending mail on Erev Shabbos. He says, believe me, there are many postal workers among us who are interested in religion, and we'd be very happy if we were released for Shabbos. And the tremendous amount of mail that we get on weekends is the only reason why we're being kept at the post office. So thank you very much. Then Rabbi Amsel adds his own Ha'ara Samarachas. Rabbi Goldstein's article made a big roshim, even outside of the rabbinic circles, and many postal workers took an interest as well, and they said, and he reiterates what they're saying. So this is at this point the discussion is really 2 different questions. There's the question of Stam as a Yid, if you want to be Nizer, not be Nichshon Lifnei Iver, and causing Chil Shabbos, is this an Isser? And then there was another question, which was, if we as a frum community all band together and stop sending all this mail on Erev Shabbos, will that, even if it's mutter, technically, will that help? Will that be beneficial to a certain number of Yidden who are in the postal office, postal system, who might be released from their work, who seems to be saying the same thing? I suggest, he says, Rabbi Goldstein's article be translated into Yiddish and into English and be publicized far and wide. People should avoid sending mail on Friday. Okay? Discussion continues. In issue number 57, so this is already Tishrei Tazayin, we already have made it into the next year, and that's the pace at which these types of discussions used to go, apparently. So someone by the name of Rav Shalom HaKohen Weiss writes in. And he writes, who is he? Lefanim Rav Be'uhli Ka'es Be'Brooklyn. So I looked him up a bit, not a name that I was familiar with before, but he was a Rav that was born in Hungary. Il is famously in Hungary, in 1922, and he was a Rav there for a bit after the war as well, and then he ended up here, and he had a shul in Borough Park, and he called himself the Rav of Il. He had a shul Beis Shloime, and he printed a lot of Sfarim. Charedish Rav, I don't know if he was strongly affiliated with anyone in particular or not, but the Chashiva Hungarian Rav, when he passed away in Tafshin Samach, all the Chashiva, Charedish, Rabbanim and Rebbes all came to be masped him. So he responded. So you're seeing this type of communication between different Rabbanim from different backgrounds. So he says in Hamar, number 51, Rabbi Goldstein raised this issue, and he says, Taka, major question, and this affects all aspects of our lives. So there are more irreligious Jews than there are religious Jews, and we're surrounded by them at all times, and we're interacting with them at all times, and really we should maybe have the Lifnei Iver on our mind at every moment, because who knows what interaction could create a Lifnei Iver problem. Says, for example, you have grocery stores that sell treif. What happens when a religious Jew walks in? You're trying to just have a grocery store not limited to the frum community. I don't know how many frum grocery stores there were at the time. I guess there were more that were not limited to the frum community. So are you being machshel people when by treif, etc.? He's just throwing that in to show how lifnei iver is a question that can affect many aspects of life. So he also launches into this discussion from the same angle. There's a Shita Saritva. He says, Shita Saritva. Can't just quote the Shita Saritva without any additional context. And maybe here's where you see the difference between Litvishe Rabbanim and Hungarian Rabbanim. Litvishe Rabbanim, like Rabbi Feinstein, very much tended to take a look at Gemara, Rishonim, come up with a mahalach. They weren't as concerned with checking, cross-checking every single shut that might have discussed the same topic. Hungarian Rabbanim, by training, were a lot more likely to be familiar and quote and take into consideration everything that anyone might have said on the topic. So he says, the Ritva, the Shut Beis Shleima, and that's Taka, he called his Shul Beis Shleima. And he was related, I don't know, it says Moiri Chamizal, and it was Mamash Shver, or there was definitely a relation there, a connection there. He says that the Beis Shleima says it's not so pashat in these types of situations. Maybe we can reinterpret the Ritva. The Meiri was probably published more recently, so the Meiri wasn't as powerful and influential in these halachic discussions, and the Ritva can be taken in different ways. So he launches into the discussion, and then, interestingly, it says, Hamshech Yava, Yemir Hashem. The Hamshech, this is in Tishrei, the Hamshech came in Adar, so you have to wait half a year to find out what the punchline was. In the meanwhile, so here comes maybe the most exciting part, the part that the Mashpia remembered all these years later. So in issue number 59, Kislev Tafshin Tezayin, Bamas HaKaire, section for people to write in. So there's a short, mamish, half a column of text, a letter from Rav Menachem Per, a rabbi in Ozone Park. Rav Menachem Per also, I think, had a Litvish background. And he ended up being a rabbi in Ozone Park, South Ozone Park in Queens for many years. He had a Litvish background when he was more of an American rabbi, but an American rabbi who actually cared about Chilul Shabbos apparently and things like that. I understand that he has a son who wrote a biography of his father, which I have not had the chance to see. It was implied to me that there might be more information, more background on his father's involvement in this whole topic, but I haven't had the chance to get to the book or to the author, the Rabbi Per's son. But the Rabbi Per writes in, and he says, I ask that you publish this short tshuva that I received from Harav Agoyin, etc., Aharon Kotler, Shlita. So he's clearly involved in some capacity himself, but it seems to be mainly getting letters from others, as we shall see. Rabbi Kotler and others, as we'll see in later issues as well. And this is the following that was planned, letters and shipments through the mail in Erev Shabbos or Erev Yom Tov, in places Shemitzuyim L'Roiv, which Pashtus means there are many, not Aroiv, L'Roiv means there are many Jewish workers in the post office. And this leads to Chil Shabbos. Hadavar Pashut L'Isur, the Oivrim Belav the Lifnei Iver. So he goes out and just makes a statement, a blanket statement. Obviously, the Oivrim Lifnei Iver. V'yesh Levar Hadavar Barucha V'ein Kan Makim. I'm not going to explain anything, I'm just going to give you a statement. But the halach is clear. He says, I've already gotten my yeshiva's office not to send mail on Erev Shabbos and Erev Yom Tov, and there are other good reasons to avoid this. V'oimar, Shalom, etc. V'chabdei Mekira is signed Rabbi Kotler. So, he doesn't go out and just say, look, we need to get, I hear there are Yidden working in the post office, and it would be a great help to them. He goes all the way and says, Pashut, you're over, Lifnei Iver, and there are other reasons. So, a few issues later, number 61, Adar, Tafshin Tazai, meanwhile, of Rabbi Weiss of Eel, continues, picks up where he left off. So, he wasn't very convinced by the whole Ritva thing that Tuvia Goldstein was relying on. But then he quotes, I think I may have quoted this once before, I didn't have a chance to go check whether I did and what the context was, but essentially there's the tshuva from Shlomo Kluger about the concept of hal itehu, where sometimes we say, this person likes Avedas, Do I have to prevent him from a situation in which he'll be over and the Averi likes to be over on? I don't have to. Haliteyu l'Rosh v'yomais. Let him, chas v'shalom, get stuffed on his own poison. So I'm not sure. What?
Vending machines?
Perhaps. Akopanim, I'm not sure, Tov Shlomo Kluger, how often Haliteyu was invoked in halach. Chazal use it for specific things, maybe Shemitah related or whatever, there were challenges at the time of Chazal, at certain large numbers of Yidden were nichshel in certain major categories of halacha. But subsequently, I'm not sure there really was that kind of metzias. Maybe around the time of Shlomo Kluger, you start seeing larger numbers of irreligious Jews, and maybe that was good timing for bringing this concept back. So Shlomo Kluger says that the Torah is only choshesh lifnei iver if we don't know otherwise that he would be over on this Aveda anyway. Then the Torah says, because maybe if you don't give it to him, lo yasu Aveda zu. You have to feel that there's a chance that your action, your prevention is making a difference. And he quotes the Mishnah, Kerem Ravoy, Meiser, different things. And he says, that's dafka by a yid, not by a guy. Meaning some of these mekaydes, they made it sound like even if the guy has already a behemoth, you can't give him another behemoth. He says, taka by a guy, even if he was already over, he says, maybe stam a guy doesn't know that it's asur. He's like a shaykh, which is a very interesting thing to say, because usually when we talk about Shavit B'nayach, we say the opposite. We say that a guy is chayiv misa, right away, automatically, he doesn't get that extra room of, he didn't know. But every time you're giving him another opportunity, it's more of an issue. But a yid, the vada knows it's an aver, and he's doing the veda anyway. So we have no achrayas. The whole achrayas felt that up, and it's no problem. Then he quotes the already other. So this is he's essentially saying. Shalom Weiss is saying this is not maybe this particular iteration of the question is new, but Achrayim have been talking about different variations of Lifnei Iver in the last 200 years. They have a lot to say about it. Say about the Ritva, say this idea from the Shlomo Kluger. Now the question is, we mentioned that someone who's Mechal Shabbos might be a mummer. Now, Dovid Goldstein mentioned that as perhaps Tzad Lahakol, that you're not even a Messiah. He says the question is, if according to Shlomo Kluger you're only mutter by a yid, then you're also by a guy, and a mummer l'chal Shabbos has a din like a guy. So do we say that a mummer l'chal Shabbos is like a guy also lahakol? That how's it going to work? Meaning, if you say it's mamish like a guy, then you have to be machmer like a guy. You're going to tell me no, he's like a guy, but only lahakol. That certain things that I'm not allowed to do with a yid, I'm allowed to do with a yid, but things that I'm not allowed to do with a guy, I'm still allowed to do with him because he's a yid. Akabarim, that's the kav that he goes in, and that would be the direction in his view to discuss, and that would be what the heter would look like if you can't be nizer. But kol bal nefesh yachush la'atzmoi lotzis midei chashashes livchar adarach hayeser betucha mikol nezek, better to avoid it. That was what Rabbi Weiss, that was his take on it. Then, interestingly, comes another shtickle here by Rabbi Yitzchak Meir HaKayan Rappaport, the Rav of Prague in Brooklyn. Also a name that I wasn't especially familiar with, though apparently, those who know the names of more obscure Rabbanim would have heard of him. So he responds, and he actually gets a few digs in at Rav Aharon Kotler, which is interesting to see. Also, like I said back then, to see in a kaivetz where everybody could write in what they felt and sich reiben sich, zwischen sich. So he says, there's Rabbi Weiss, there's Rabbi Goldstein, the Ritva, not the Ritva. And then he says in Chaveres 59, Mevi Heira le'isik hilchasa b'loi taima me'agayin Aharon Kotler. It's like stam, a declaration. He says, L'daiti ha'aniyah, the whole conversation is misplaced. Everyone forgot that the post office, you're not handing things to Yidden over here, you're handing things to the post office. The post office is a government agency. And we pay taxes, we pay for the stamps, and we put our mail in the mailbox, and we're giving it to the Goyish government agency, and that's it. We give no further instructions. She says, hey, Bazar, but if it's lifnei, dilifnei, you put it somewhere, and then from there, it ultimately can get to the Yid. Lav dafka, this is the same problem. So he says Lufnei de Lufnei is a much better way to explain why this is not a problem. It goes through different Makaitis. So he says this would be, in addition, who says your thing has even been given to a Yid, and not everything from Erev Shabbos even gets processed on Shabbos. A lot of it just gets pushed off to Monday. So there's no direct cause and effect here that you are automatically, you're like handing it to a Yid. You're not handing it to a Yid at all. He says, I saw Rabbi Goldstein in one line Taka mentioned that Lefnei de Lefnei, he rejected it. Rabbi Goldstein didn't like the Lefnei de Lefnei. He says, I don't understand why he rejected it. This is the correct way of looking at it. So right here, we're not even telling the government what to do. We just put it in the mailbox, and the government can do whatever it wants. It can wait a day, it can wait 2 days, it can wait 3 days, it can give it to this one, give it to that one. We have no direct say in what's going to happen next. So I don't see the reason why we're making everyone crazy with Nugzedis. He says, if it was taka true, that if the whole Jewish world got together and we don't send mail on Friday, then all the Yidden are going to be sent home from the post office from their jobs, then maybe I could see an art to say, oh, we should make a gzeda. But unfortunately, it's not going to help at all. If thousands of Yidden send their mail on, if a few thousand Yidden send their mail on Thursday, nothing's going to change. We're not causing the Kolel Shabbos. And then he concludes, we would very, very much love to see any reasons and explanations for what Aharon Kotler said. Maybe he found in Shas Bavin Yerushalmi another chash, that for that reason he holds with certainty that it's usher to give. He's obviously being somewhat sarcastic about it. And he's also skeptical that the Jewish community can make much of a difference in terms of the employment of the Yidden working in that either way. A few issues later, number 65, this is already Menachem Av, Tafshin Tazayin. If I said the date when Aharon Kotler's thing was published, so I'll say it again. That was Kislev Tazayin. Just in case you want to place the story with the Rebbe, if it happened, so it would have been around Kislev Tevis time. But the conversation continued. Like I said, Rabbi wrote in. Rappaport was, I think, had more of a Polish background. So you have Polish Rabbanim, Hungarian Rabbanim, different views, different perspectives, etc. A few issues later, in number 65, of Tazayin, number 65, Rav Shlomo Zalman Broin writes in. Of course, Rav Shlomo Zalman Broin is the Zayda of Rabbi Broin of Crown Heights, author of Shiur Mitzvah Ba'alacha, and he writes in. He says, I see you're having this whole discussion about mail. Shiur Mitzvah Ba'alacha, Chelik Beis, I already discussed this, and I already quoted the Ksav Sefer, and I quoted this one, I quoted that one, that Messiah is only if it's B'Shas Maisa, but if it's not B'Shas Maisa, if it's Friday, there's no Isra yet, it's not a problem. So that's what he wrote in to remind everyone that he'd already addressed it. But as we can see, Rabbi Per did not rest, did not stop, and he continued, and Nisan Tafshin Yud Zayin, a whole year later, from the whole year after the previous thing he submitted another 2 letters that he received from Litvisher Rosh Yeshiva. So he's just sticking to that crowd. So he brought another 2 Rosh Yeshivas in, who also just do the exact same thing. Rav Mendel Zaks. So Rav Mendel Zaks was famously a son-in-law of the Chafetz Chaim. He was involved in the Mishnah Brura to some extent. He was a Rosh Yeshiva in Radin, and then when he came to America, he ended up at YU, at the Yeshiva Rabbi Yitzchak Chanan, and he was Rosh Yeshiva and a Boichen, and then he retired and passed away in Eretz Yisrael. So Rav Mendel Zaks wrote to Rabbi Per, so it's addressed to Rabbi Per, says, regarding your question, if you're allowed to send, and it's causing a takala for the workers, the way I heard from you and the way I heard from others, that there are many Jewish postal workers complaining, that's how he phrases it, because they're all complaining, and Efrat, the Meistes HaTorah that are sending all this mail, and it's besides that you get the same punishment as you're from, it's also the lav, that's from Mendel Zaks, and you also got to Moshe Chevreini, who was a Rosh Yeshiva of Chevron, Slabatka, in Eretz Yisrael. Moshe Chevreini wrote, I'm schlepping in Rosh Yeshiva from Eretz Yisrael. What happens in New York is that you're sending mail out of Shabbos, as good as a bad. Vadish layafa isim karigormim lechel Shabbos shekayidua harbe me'achenu b'nei Yisrael mepkidei hadoya or be'emesh zeu aser al pidin Torah mikama tzdodim b'davar pasha to what shein tzedek laharech. So they're all saying it's totally aser, obviously, without actually elaborating. Whenever any moshes that send mail are doing the wrong thing, and that's it. And that's really how the discussion ended. A few issues later, someone else wrote in to Amar saying, by the way, what's the story with mail and Erev Shabbos? And Marecha says, oh, glad you asked. We had a whole discussion about it over the last while. So what else do we know about, so that's what I found in Amar. There's more to the story, a little bit. Especially as we'll get soon to the fact that Ramesh Feinstein also had some significant statements that he made on this topic. So, but in the biography of Aharon Kotler, they describe this, they quote a Talmud who might have even been there when the Chashash was Nis'ayr. A certain Talmud said he was there, Rabbi was about to send a mail out of Shabbos, and suddenly he stopped and he said, "Oi, well, what if there's a Yid that works in the post office? Can we follow the Roiv? If you're not follow the Roiv," and that is an important question which we'll get to about the Roiv, as we'll see. But he wasn't sure if we should follow the Roiv or not, so therefore he decided not to send it. And then Rabbi Per actually was publicizing in the Jewish Observer. The Jewish Observer was, then at some point they stopped. I don't remember when it began, but it might have been all the way back then. He was publishing ads in the Jewish Observer being ma'arer that Yidden or Meistes should not send mail on Erev Shabbos. So there was clearly a larger campaign going on with Rabbi Per's involvement and perhaps even Aharon Kotler's involvement. And then that's all it says in the biography. That's where they leave it. So that is probably more correct and verified. A lot of Svarim quote this following story. B'Shem a sefer called Orchos Chasidecha. Orchos Chasidecha says that one day Aharon Kotler found out that the Yidden work in the post office on Shabbos. So he turned to the directorship of the post office and said, "Please give the Yidden off. Let them release them for Shabbos." He said, "Sorry, we can't. The Yiddish Meistes are sending so much mail on Friday that there's no way we can let them go." He said, "Oh yeah, we have to make a campaign." So he made a campaign and he ran from Moised to Moised and he got them, he told them, "You have to stop sending mail on Friday." And it got so undernomen that it's usher that they stopped. Everyone knew that you don't have to send mail on Erev Shabbos, and the volume of mail dropped so drastically that they let all the Yidden go home for Shabbos. So I'm assuming that that's maybe like a yeshiva lunchroom version of the parsha. Unless there's more evidence of what happened then, I'm sure, like I said, there could be more information out there that I didn't find. What's interesting now is to see that actually there was a major Pesach that addressed what Aharon Kotler was arguing, and that is Ramesh Feinstein. And Igros Moshe Chelik Hey, which contains Eirech Chaim Chelik Gimel. So this in Simon involved, there's a letter, a tshuva from Tafshin Chav Gimel, so a bit later already, but I guess still when this was considered to be an issue. A letter to someone, the main question, the title of the tshuva is about someone who didn't want to wear a gartel to shul on Shabbos. I don't know, maybe he wore a short jacket, he didn't feel comfortable putting a gartel and walking in the street, so he wanted to know if he can somehow wrap the gartel around his collar and tie his tie to it, make some contraption that the gartel's kaviyachol holding his tie. And Moshe explains to him that no, that's not how it works at all. And you can't stick gartlach and belts wherever. It has to be over a particular lavush and be holding that lavush in place. And it has to be the kind of lavush which you would want to hold in place. So you can't put it over your undershirt, Erev Moshe says, because you wouldn't want your undershirt to be straight, right? So in Chabad Tak, people that put another thing under their shirt over the tzitzis, they want to hold their tzitzis in place. That's different. Moshe doesn't mention that possibility, but it makes more sense. Not an undershirt, not this, not that. He says, Moshe doesn't fail to mention that really you don't need a gartel today anymore anyway, because the gartel was just to separate ben lev le'erva. Now we all have tight pants with a waist of the pants, or we have a belt, so it's time for extra. Obviously, as we know, Litvish are not makbid on wearing a gartel, but at any rate, you would have to wear it over your top beged, or else no good. But then the last paragraph. Last paragraph says, and in places where there are Yidden, like in New York, Brooklyn, so even though they are the Miot, and the Roiv are Goyim, and even among the Yidden that work there, many of them are Shemer Shabbos, he says. They do go home for Shabbos. There's just a Miot of Mechalei Shabbos, but since there are some Yidden that work there, Min Haroi Lahachmer, so on the one hand he says, be right to be Machmer, Af She'en Yadua Isser Bar Bazeh. So pushing back against those who say Davar Pashat L'Isser, he says, I don't know what the Isser would be, because since the Roiv are Goyim, follow the Roiv. That's it. And if it's a place not like Brooklyn where there aren't even Mitsuyin, it's not like there are tons of Yidden, it's not common that there are Yidden, even though you could still say, what if theoretically there's a Yid, who knows? Well, what's interesting is that in the last few years, an article of Moshe Feinstein has printed a series called Messiah's Moshe. Now, this article of Moshe is a bit of a controversial fellow, and what he writes wouldn't necessarily be believed automatically, but what he claims is that he was keeping notebooks the entire time as he was an article sitting by Moshe's side, and that he essentially transcribed all the conversations and all the interactions that were going on at the time. Whatever I have looked at personally always seems to check out and fit and stem with whatever we do know about any particular episode. I was talking to Rabbi today, and he said that he's makabel it because he thinks that the uncles, Reuven Feinstein or Dovid Feinstein, or Moshe's sons, wrote this very special haskama for the sefer. They know it's essentially what people's concerns are, and they are, confirming that they do believe that this is all accurate. So with all of those caveats and disclaimers, it's interesting, I came across that Messiah's Moshe Chelik Gimel, he writes, a chashuv Rav asked me about mail on Shabbos. Doesn't say a name. Who was the Rav? Probably Rabbi Per. And he sent me a letter from one of the Gedolim Zatzal. Doesn't say a name, but what's the quote? Hadavar Pashut Le'Isser. Obviously that's Aharon Kotler. And he sent me a copy of another Gadol who wrote Vadu Shel Yafa Eisim. That's, you can see, is the quote from Rav Moshe Chavreini. So this is what was brought to Rav Moshe's attention. So Rav Moshe said, it's written in Hebrew, but the Hebrew tracks very much with Yiddish syntax. If you know that a Yid will have be over an Isser, then it's Aser. So, meaning, essentially, Rav Moshe disagrees with the idea that Rav Tovia Goldstein was saying, that you're just being Meisif. Says, in the footnote he says, well, I asked him, what if aren't you just being meisif to what he has already? So Moshe says, it's a taina, but it would start depending, you didn't want to go down that route. He says, if you know for sure, then it's awesome. Because if you know that your local mailman who picks the mail up will show up on Shabbos, if you know that, that would be a problem. But he says, if you know that Yidden are working, but you don't know that Dafka Yid's going to deal with this letter, so if Roiv Goyim or Roiv workers are Goyim, the Torah is matir. And we assume that every single letter will be processed by a goy, because in Torah we follow the Dovid. He says, Torah doesn't work with statistics. In statistics you say, if 30% of the workers are Yidden, then 30% of the mail will be processed by Yidden. Ramesh says, we specifically reject that way of looking at it. The Torah says we follow the Dovid. So 100% of letters we assume will be processed by goyim. That's just how we look at it, that's how we think about it. And he says, it's pashat apela, v'yom and zegeshvib and azal chetshuvas, it's pashat keneged hadin. That's what he quotes of Moshe as saying. Moshe says, Bechlal, we see that we're making lifnei even more than other Yisurim. You have the lifnei de lifnei idea. So it's mutar l'chatchila if it's lifnei de lifnei. So even if you knew for sure that he would carry the letter, Moshe says, in essence, actually, maybe it's not a problem because it's lifnei de lifnei. You only brought it to the mailbox or to the post office. That's already tzarech. Here, Rav Moshe didn't want to fully commit to those other lines of reason. But Rav Moshe, like he wrote in the Tshuva, it's so simple. There's Rav Goyim and the discussion. Rav Moshe said, I never went and told people that it's okay, because no one asked me. But I was never meich if I saw people sending mail on Friday. And be'emes, you can't be mach. It's better to bring the mail on the first half of Friday, so you're giving them room to theoretically finish processing, doing their work before Shabbos comes in. But even that's not the yikuva, because again, Roiv Goyim, Roiv workers are Goyim. Then he says another opportunity, Yan Rosh Yeshiva called Rav Moshe directly to agitate, to say, well, we're making... And Rav Moshe himself answered the telephone, and he says, Rav Moshe said, if a Yachid will machmer sein, for sich, das ist ein Sach. Aber it's a paskin and a psak shel sheker, das is aser. That's what he says, Rav Moshe said. And the ganze Metzias that you know that there are Yidden that are working is garnished connected the Metzias of Torah. Torah is matir b'tzad reif. And like in every case where you're soymech on the reif and chazaka, you think every time you're soymech on a chazaka to be matir and eishes ish, you think 100% of cases the husband taka was taken out around? Statistically, there are cases in which the chazaka doesn't hold up, but we follow chazaka. The Rosh Yeshiva said, yeah, it's so simple that we're matlef even when there's a roiv. By the way, that's how in the biography, that's taka how it's stated as well, that he wasn't sure whether a roiv works here or not. That was also how he framed the question. So the Rosh Yeshiva said, yeah, we're matlef when there's a roiv. So why is it also to sell things to goyim who might resell it to yidden? Sounds like it's just on a chance, on a possibility. Moshe said, obviously, in those cases, Rav customers are Yidden. So it was so obvious, didn't have to say that. But obviously, it's only in a case where Rav are Yidden when you're just being Chayshish for Lifnei Iver indirectly. And that goes on, but that's essentially what Rav Moshe said. Okay, it's already 6 o'clock, so I'm just going to conclude quickly. I found the Shiur of Menashe Klein. Menashe Klein writes a whole arichas about how it's mutter. And then he comes to Aharon Kotler's letter, he quotes it, he says, what about the letters? He says, no, I think Aharon meant that Shemitzuyim Sham Roiv Yehudim. He sort of rereads and fudges the word, there's Roiv Yehudim, but B'Pashtos, that's not the pshat, where Aharon wrote Lo Roiv, just means that there's many of them. And if in the whole discussion, as it's described elsewhere, no one ever claimed that there were Roiv Yidden anywhere. It was just a large number, but never Roiv. But that's Rabbi Menashe Klein's charitable way of making everything shtim nicely. He also goes off into a whole discussion as to whether even over in Isser Ksiva, but what are they doing? They're stamping, they're being mekalkal. He has a whole technical discussion of that. There's also Rabbi Dovid Harpenis, who's a Pesach in Williamsburg, writes about it, and he also mentions that he heard that some Yerei Shamayim are machmir not to send mail in Erev Shabbos, and this discussion of Rabbi, then he says, I heard that it was started by Rosh Yeshiva. And he quotes the whole story from Orchas Chasidecha about how all the Yidden lived happily ever after. So anyway, at this point, the law has changed. Jews have freedom to take off, and certainly Rabbi Harpus doesn't care about a Yid who has the ability to take off for Shabbos and doesn't, then certainly I don't think he minds. And others have mentioned as well that all kinds of things have changed in the reality. So even those that were machmer amol, Lav Dafka would be machmer anymore based on how the Metzias is today. And in conclusion regarding the Rebbe, so first of all, so it's very interesting to see how this Mashpia Zikarin about that he wrote this, and the Taka turned out to be 100% true. So his Namanis is looking pretty good right now. Do we have to believe the second half of the story? You don't have to. Also, you can be done and discuss, what exactly, do we know the exact history as to, was this a large mail dump every Friday, like the other meisters sending out all their mail for the week? Was this just for Pashas? I would think that in the Rebbe's office they sent mail immediately every single day, and there's nothing that they had on Friday that they could have sent on Thursday. Whatever they're sending on Friday, but Pashas was for Friday. It's also not stam fundraising. It's often pikuach nefesh, wichtige zachen. I'm sure the Rebbe knew that there was no Yiddish mailman coming and picking it up. I imagine in that case the Rebbe would have been more chayshish. So it's hard to know for sure. If anybody has any more concrete information about what the story was, the Maskidas with the Rebbe, I'd be happy to hear. But that is the story of Good Shabbos.